who are in prison because of anger, who have lost relationships because of anger, who've lost access to their children because of anger, and who are homeless because of anger.
Hey guys, I'm Devon Harris. You're watching Keep On Pushing TV, where we share ideas and insights that are going to challenge and inspire you to keep on pushing and in the process, live your absolute best life. If there's one emotion we know men are quite capable of demonstrating, it's anger. So meet Gary Napier, who will speak to us today about his own issues with anger and now how, as a therapist, he helps men navigate and deal with those issues. Enjoy.
This is Keep On Pushing TV with Devon Harris.
So, Gary, I was reading a while back, and they spoke about the fact that psychotherapists have reduced this complexity of human emotions to four main areas: sad, glad, mad, and scared. And, when we think of men are not very good at expressing their emotions, except when it comes down to being mad, angry. Do you find that to be the case in your practice?
Yes, I agree with that. It's very often that men try to contain their emotions because we've been taught incorrectly, as far as I'm concerned, that we shouldn't share our emotions. It should be hidden as a real man. So often with men, when they come in and they have an opportunity to speak, they often explode in a controlled way, but they have so much bottled up inside of them that it's that opportunity to actually release it, because like every human being on the planet, men as well as women are made up with emotions, an integral part of our being.
Yeah, so you mentioned women. Obviously, women are angry as well, or have anger as well, but they don't express it the same way that men do. Men tend to be far more vocal and sometimes, physically violent. Um, is that because of society? There seems to be this kind of double standard and this acceptance of anger expressed by men.
I think by nature we're very quick at putting people into roles, and very, back in the day, if it was a boy, you're dressed in blue, and if it's a girl, you're dressed in pink. However, I would say modern day society, that is now very different, and that's a good thing. Also, part of the identity confusion regards to who am I, what role do I play in myself as well as in society. And with answer to your question, I would say there's now many women who are coming, who are revealing their anger they're carrying inside. So whilst traditionally people will see it as men and anger, in the counselling world, there's very much many women who are struggling with anger, because anger is an emotion. It's not discriminative regards to whether you're male or female. It's an emotion whereby we feel hurt and there's a wrong against us, and often that causes the first of all the frustration, which often develops into anger. So yeah, men and women are now experiencing and feeling more comfortable, I would say, Devon, about admitting, or at least acknowledging, they do have an issue with anger.
Mm. So you mentioned, frustration being one of the things that is expressed in anger, and as again, just thinking, and I've learned that anger is a secondary emotion. So, what are some of the other things other than, I guess, frustration that you think our anger is masking, especially when it comes down to men?
Oh, deep question. I would say, in my experience personally within the profession, often the root cause of anger is rejection, some form of rejection, whether that's been within the home, whether that's been in society, but it's that feeling of I don't belong, or somebody who should want me doesn't want me. And that also plays out to the marriage, regards to whether the husband could feel like, or the male partner could feel threatened that their wife is going to lose them. So often there's a threat, and that threat can be perceived as reality or an imagination, but it's real to that person. But the deep root, Devon, is often found in rejection.
Mm. So, excuse me, rejection, which I suppose also leads to some self-esteem issues, lack of confidence.
Most certainly. You think if you're your primary carers are your mum and your dad in a ideal context, or the guardian. And if one of them has rejected you either by leaving the home or not giving you the attention you deserve or the love you deserve, then your self-esteem is going to be affected, because they're the people who meant to receive unconditional love and that encouragement and that fulfillment. And if the people who primary carers don't give that to you, then there's a lack of trust, and that lack of trust affects your self-esteem, and that then affects how you are in the world, because you think, if I'm not getting that from the people who by right I should receive that from, then how can I trust people outside my home context?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up there, because I spoke to my friend Rob Corbin, and he does a lot of
Right.
work as well with, uh, uh, especially men and their anger, and in his work, he's discovered that the most men are angry at their father, and then the next person in line is their mother. And it was an interesting revelation to me, because as you just pointed out, the people who should be loving you the most and showing unconditional love, it seems, are the ones um, who hurt us the most. What's your take on that?
Unfortunately, what you said is true for most people. And what I'm finding is that there's a pattern, and often the mum or the dad who do not fulfill that obligation of giving that child that love and that security they require, is because they themselves have been suffered some form of rejection. And it is often monkey see, monkey do. So because they didn't receive it from either their mum or their dad, they lack that emotional intelligence, maturity to be able to pass that on, because they're still suffering from that hurt, and often in ignorance as well, not being aware that they're carrying that. So it's a cycle. And often when I then speak about their upbringing, their parents, and we look at how their mums and dads were raised by their grandma and granddads respectively, you see that there's a strong trend there whereby their parents have suffered rejection, and they're playing on to their parents. And it's about stopping that cycle.
Yeah. So I know that you do a lot of work with men, and helping them to deal with their anger issues. And that is kind of born out of your own personal experiences as well. Would you like to kind of share that with us?
Me, Devon, I'm never angry.
Not right now, thankfully.
You've got the wrong Gary. Very much so. It's interesting because we're preparing a webinar, and I'm speaking about how I never knew I was an angry person. And yet, when I started receiving therapy myself, it then became so obvious that there was so much anger and rage inside of me. And that was born out of going back to what we just spoke about, not having my dad around. My dad was alive. He passed away 2 years ago. But for the majority of my life, after the age of 5, my dad was in and out of my life, more out than in. And I didn't realize that that was feeding most of my anger, because I guess my anger was disguised because I was very passionate about football. So in football, being competitive, that was a channel for my energy, which I didn't realize was being sourced and fueled by anger. But looking back, I realized I didn't like losing more than other people. If we lost the game, I'd have to let out the anger somehow. I had a very quick temper, and I just tried to simmer it by being competitive. So I had to be the best at school, the best academically, the best. And I thought that was me being ambitious. But what I didn't realize, that was just a channel for me to really, that underneath it all was a very angry person.
Mm. That's kind of interesting, because I think you're right that men, I assume women as well, find outlets for their anger. Sports for us men tend to be one. But I never thought of it in terms of, hey, I want to be the best academically. Let's say I'm really ambitious. That oftentimes it's, or maybe not oftentimes, but sometimes it's the anger that is driving us, which is, I guess it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. Because whenever I achieved something, so if I got football of the year or did well in my exams, the moment wouldn't last very long. And I'd always be thinking the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And I thought that was just me being ambitious. But what I realized is that I was chasing for that affirmation, which a piece of paper is not going to give you. Winning a football match is not going to give you, because if you're not enough without it, you're never going to be enough with it. And also, Devon, my anger was expressed through arguing. So I was always very good with my mouth, with my words, and that's how I used to fight. Not necessarily with my fist, as you can see, I'm not a big
Mhm.
guy, but I knew my mouth was a weapon, and I knew I could belittle people and destroy people with the words that came out of my mouth. So people wouldn't want to engage in much discussion with me because I'd always want to take it down a route where I can argue, get my point across, and almost crush that person. And it's only when you look back, you think, gosh, how was I like that? But yeah, my mouth was my weapon, my main weapon to exercise my anger.
Yeah. You know, you said something just now that just transported me back to the movie Cool Runnings, where Darius Bonnet, the driver, was confronting his coach about cheating. And the coach says, hey, you know, a gold medal is a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it, you know? And,
Sure,
yeah,
yeah,
and it seems that that's the case as well with us trying to deal with our anger. That although
yeah,
we it may drive us to be ambitious and we may accomplish things, but the underlying void is not filled,
yes,
right?
yeah. And for me, that void, the key void, was most certainly my dad. My dad not being present in my life, particularly at key moments. And football, as you're aware now, was a big part of my life. And my mum used to go to every single game when able, when it was snowing, raining, sunshine. She used to watch me and my brother later. But Devon, I always used to look at that sideline and just be thinking, I wish my dad was there.
Mhm.
I wish my dad was there watching me. And we kicked about with the ball when we were young, but in terms of when I started playing at a proper level and looking at the sideline and thinking, he's never seen me. And when he died 2 years ago, I thought my dad never see me participate in the sport that I love the most. And that was often a common theme when I used to manage teams later, and particularly amongst initially black men, but it then became across all races whereby if I was looking after managing young teams, and I'd be like, where are the parents? The mums would be there, sorry, but where are the dads? And you just saw
Mhm.
the absentees of dads there. And it was like, what must that be doing to that young man on that football pitch thinking, the person supposed to be my role model is not there watching me.
Yeah. So how did you reconcile things with your dad?
It was a long process, and it was first of all there was a period of denial where my dad was still my model. I wanted to be like him, and I saw him more as a friend than actual dad, but there was no animosity what I thought towards him. And it wasn't too later on when my dad's was we got into an argument. He asked to borrow some money, and I said I agreed to it. I was coming back late from a football game, and then he called me. This was before mobile phones, and he was harassing, I think, my wife at the time, saying, "Where's Gary?" And I just lost it with him. And with his partner at the time, I remember telling her to get out of that relationship. And she was asking me why. And I said, I'm not going to tell you why, but I said, he's not a nice man. If you can get out, just get out. And I remember I really losing it. And one of my special angles was slamming phones down. I've broken so many phones over the time. And I remember slamming the phone down and thinking, I can't stand him. And it was then I really, really recognised how much anger and hatred I had towards this man who's supposedly my dad. And so, in answer to your question, how did I come to terms? It wasn't until period of 2004, and my granddad, my dad's dad, took ill, and I
Before you
was
tell
told
me
that.
that, you just
Sure,
said something, and I'm kind of curious because
yeah,
you know you came to the realization that you know what I'm really angry at this guy. Were you frightened by that revelation?
yes,
Surprised?
and
What I mean, how did you feel?
I wasn't. I was more frightened. It was a surprise, but I thought, yes, I have got all this towards my dad. But it's when I was angry, Devon. I remember looking at myself in the mirror one occasion, and I saw my dad, and I saw the anger and the rage in it, and I frightened myself, and that's what really scared me. And I thought, if I'm frightened of me, how then must my wife? I'm not sure if he was married then, but Sarah became my wife. How must she feel towards me, and also my family members? And I remember telling you previously, I was that person in the family that you wouldn't tell if something went wrong because you were too scared of how Gary's going to react. So sometimes it was advantageous because I was the person that would defend, but other times it was like, just keep going away. So when I saw myself in the mirror and I saw my dad, that's when I realised how angry I could be and then how much I disliked my dad.
Yeah. So then your grandfather, you were telling us, um, started to, I guess, was it the pivot to help you to deal with your dad?
Yes, he was. I couldn't understand it. I mean, my granddad, he was always in my life, and he was a complete opposite to my dad in terms of gentle nature, very passive. I remember asking him what happened to my dad. Why is my dad so different? And he then told me, which I got a glimpse into his behaviour, although not an excuse, that back in Jamaica, he had two sons, and my dad was the model son, very good at school, loved his mum, and there was no problems with him. And he said his mum died through diabetes at the age of 12. And that was a pivotal moment for my dad, whereby his nature changed, because I remember my dad telling me himself how his uncle saw him start to cry. And he said, "Don't cry, otherwise you'll go mad." And whether he said that in jest, I don't know. But my dad took it seriously. He took it literally. So when my dad didn't cry, so from what I realized, my dad never grieved. But naturally, he had an anger, which then played out in later life, towards women because his own mum wasn't there. And I used to say to my granddad, "Let's go to Jamaica," because all my other family in America, or my mum's side, Barbados. And I didn't understand why my granddad never would want to go. And I said, "Granddad, I'll pay for you," because I was working then. And then I realised that he didn't want to go back because people would then ask him about his son and the shame that would bring on him and the family. He just didn't want to say how his son has turned out. So my granddad, from when he came over here in the 1950s, never saw Jamaica again.
Mm, yeah. So, you're talking earlier and just about how, the way parents, kind of respond to their kids is often as a result of how they were treated when they were kids. So it's this generational baggage, and it sounds like, obviously your dad had a traumatic experience in Jamaica when his mom died, and he kind of bottled in all that grief, and spewed it on you. And then no, you became your dad, as I said. You look in the mirror, and the guy that you hated the most was the one that you're seeing. Um, how did that play out in your own life, in your family, in your marriage, and with your kids?
Well, going back when I was 6 years of age, I think that was my main traumatic experience of my life, when I witnessed my dad attempting to murder my mum. And I was there. My brother was still very young. He was in a pushchair, so he won't remember it. But I remember seeing that very vividly. And then the police coming, being brought to the neighbour's home, and my dad going to prison. And yet I didn't hate him. And it wasn't until later on I realised that they pronounced my mum as good as dead. When she arrived at the hospital, they said, "Call the priest," and she's not going to survive because of where she was punctured. And my gran, who was a devout Christian, I know she would have called her and her church members to be praying for my mum. And I really got to give thanks to God for that, because I know that it was God's hand that said no. My mum told me that she's just said a prayer, "Please don't make my children an orphan." And I often think that if my mum had died, I may have turned out the same way as my dad, because I would have had this anger that my mum, the most precious things in my life, has been taken away, and history could have repeated itself. So whilst that traumatic experience didn't happen, it still affects me in terms of how I treated women. And I wasn't the best boyfriend or then husband, in terms of my anger, in terms of how I treated women. And so there, it was still played itself out. And I didn't realize that my behavior was modeled upon my dad, even though he wasn't there in my life as a typical example to follow. But in terms of the anger I was having and not knowing where this anger was coming from or who it was redirected with, yeah, there were so many things how I mistreated people, not just in relationships, but people who loved me.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you went into therapy. What prompted that?
It was somebody who suggested it to me, a good friend of mine. I saw him as a mentor, and he said he was going to therapy. It was the best thing he was doing. He's not crazy. And I dismissed it. And I thought, yeah, you never see me in therapy. And something just kept prompting me to say, follow him up on it. So I asked for the details, met the lady. The first session I was like this, probably the first 3, 4 sessions, I just wasn't interested. And then she actually said, "Look, Gary, we can play this game, or we can actually start getting some work done." And after a short while after that, I then really started unfolding my emotions, and it then became very clear, well, the obvious to everyone else, but was hidden to me, how much anger. So the next for about the best part of 3 years. This was a period, I think, between 2014 and 2017, 2018. Every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, that was my session. And I wouldn't miss it for anybody, Devon. That was my time where I could be completely on my own, be myself and come undone. And it wasn't just the anger that I had towards my dad, which people say was obvious and how it played out in my life. But then there was slight anger towards my mum. And what I was surprised by this because
That's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, the anger I had towards my mum was two things. Why didn't you protect us? Why did you stay in that volatile, abusive relationship? And also, I never had a sorry from my mum to say, I should have put you in that situation. So that came out, which I thought, my mum to me was up there, and she still is. But that unfolded, that's part of therapy, the unknown coming out. So yeah, that was surprising to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so you go through therapy, and now you've kind of you've confronted your own anger issues, and you parlay that into helping other men deal with their anger issues. How did that come about?
It was halfway through therapy, and as you go through therapy yourself, your eyes become more open to you and also the world around you. I spent a lot of time in male environments in the workplace and also the football game. And I then could start recognizing the anger in other men. And I just started developing a heart of compassion whereby I want to help other men. I don't want another angry man in this world. And especially young men growing up, and especially, particularly if they've grown up without a dad or a mum or whatever their situation is, to stop that anger. Because I think when you take away anger, then so much of the problems in society will be resolved. But if you've got an angry man in an environment, then it has a knock-on effect. And I would believe that also we've got angry women because of the angry man. So in brief, Devon, I just had a passion. I thought, right, I need to follow this through.
Yeah. And so kind of, what are some of the, I guess, advice strategies that you share with them to help them get over their anger?
Yeah. The main thing is acknowledging, and it's letting them know that anger is an emotion. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's how we use it. Because some men feel ashamed, and often they'll say, I've got anger, but I don't hit my wife. I don't do this. And it's like, it's okay. Not that it's okay to hit, but let's talk about that anger. The first most important step, Devon, is acknowledging that you or I have a problem with managing anger. And then the second step is then looking at what are the triggers. What triggers? Is it short, quick tempered? Is it when you're at home with the children? Is it in the workplace? What triggers you, the anger? And then from that, getting down to the root. What is the root cause? When did you first recognize, or somebody else recognize in your life, that you had an issue with anger? And I would say 9.5 out of 10 times, Devon, it's either to do with a mum or it's to do with the dad. It always goes back to the home.
Yeah, just as Rob said, which is, again, I find that I'm really interesting, because again, these are the people who love you and you love, and yet they're the ones who we are most angry at. And I guess it just speaks to the imperfection of us as human beings, that even when we think we're doing the absolute best for our children, we're not doing as great a job as we think we are. Isn't that so?
Yes, and when you think about the family unit, the dad is the source. That's what father means, source, and that's where he plants the seed. So if the source rejects you, then that's inevitably going to cause anger in some fashion, whether you're a son or a daughter. The
Hmm.
source, your source who's planted you, has left you or is not interested in you. And for us men, it's recognizing that in terms of everybody's a son. Yeah, whether you're a parent or not, everybody starts off as a son or a daughter. And as a
Hmm.
son or a daughter, we expect and demand to be loved and to have that um, acknowledgement of the people who brought us into that world. So if you take away that, there's going to be some form of disorder.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. How how, I guess, difficult and maybe a challenging question for you to answer though, but because everybody is different. Do you find that once men have kind of acknowledged their anger and are willing to work through it, that they find it difficult to do so, or perhaps because of, men aren't supposed to be soft and vulnerable?
I think in their minds, and I have many men who are hesitant about having therapy because it's about come and done. When they get over that, they find it so much healing because deep down they're desperate for a space and in a place where they can feel trust to let it all out, to reveal that anger, that frustration. And one of the most therapeutic experiences is I encourage men to write a letter, and they write a letter to their dad, where their dad's no longer here or dad's still here. And I say, don't try plan it. Just start with Dear Dad and let the pen flow. And it may be stop, start, or it may just go on. And it just, for so many men, that has really helped them just come out and with all their emotions. And it's not there to call their dad out and say, right, I'm going to blast you about this, that. It's about owning it. And that's what I say to men, you've got to own what's happened. And it's acknowledging that and then thinking, right, how do we then move on from this? And the hardest part, Devon, that for me and for many other men, is the forgiveness part. Because in order for us to move on in our lives with the people we love, there has to be a letting go. Letting go doesn't mean we forget. It's not saying it never happened, but it's saying that was it. We now draw a line under it. Whether our dad plays a part in our life or whether they forgive us or not, it's about us releasing ourselves from that burden in order to live that life that we deserve and our family deserve.
Can you describe what that feels like, that idea of just letting go? Obviously you can't forget what has happened to you, but you're like, you know what, you did whatever you did these horrible things to me, but I'm at peace with it. What does that feel like?
It's hard when you think about it rationally, because when somebody's been abusive to you or been absolutely think, I will never forgive you. That's a natural human reaction. When somebody does wrong, you either want to revenge or you want nothing to do with them. And bringing in my faith, because I can't ignore it. Not too long after I became a Christian in 2007, I was walking across London Bridge. I worked in the city. And I remember God saying to me very clearly, you need to forgive your dad. And I was like, what? And he was like, you need to forgive your dad. And essentially saying, I can't work with you if you've got unforgiveness in your heart. And I didn't plan it. So I just said, okay, I forgive him. And I must have meant it, because as I forgave him, I just felt this huge weight. It was like having these weights on the back of you that you can't carry and just suddenly being lifted. And by the other time I got to the other side of London Bridge, I felt such a peace, Devon. It was like I felt free. And I remember calling Sarah at the time and saying, you never guess what God has asked me to do. But I feel so much lighter. So yeah, that's the real benefit, is the freedom and the peace you get from it. Can I erase that history? No. But could I then move forward? Yes.
So that leads me to the next question. So you forgive, right? You've kind of let go. Let's say your dad is still around, and the forgiveness is kind of more for your benefit, but you're still interacting with him, and he's still an asshole. Pardon my French. How do you straddle that bridge, man?
I often say with guys that our dads and our mum, they're two people, okay? They're our parents and also a person in their own right. They were a person before they became our parents. And often part of the therapy is looking at our dads, how they were as sons and how they are outside of our lives. And coming to the position whereby we have certain expectations, but yeah, we can have lousy dads who just don't live up to the mark, but that's their responsibility. We're not responsible for that. And it's coming to that appreciation that whilst we want this and whilst we we'd like the ideal, it's managing expectations. However, in many cases, and this often played out in my relationship with my dad, I felt I was more the parent than he was. And sometimes, even if you're the child, you may have to take on that duty and that maturity to do the initiation, to get your dad involved in that conversation. It's explaining to them, look, I understand this is how you were, this is what affected you, but this also affected me. And coming on that common ground whereby you're not putting them in a position where they're going to feel ashamed and that's going to fuel their anger, but rather you come alongside and then almost do what a parent should be doing to you.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It seems that way, especially because if you have come to this kind of awakening and you're trying to still have a great relationship, let's say, and a close relationship with your dad, but he is still practicing some of those old behaviors and holding on to his hurts because he hasn't dealt with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
there's definitely that dissonance.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge
Yes.
in how you bridge that.
And it's really, it's what's very much on my heart is with our main our vision is turning the hearts of the fathers back towards their children, and also the children's hearts towards their fathers. It's a two-way process. And so many people say, well, it's the parent, they've got to come to me, I'm not going to them. But it doesn't matter, just make the first step, because as you said, Devon, both parties are hurting. Both parties
Hmm.
are, and where there's division, there can be no healing. And you may not go back, you may not be able to um, amend the past, but you can definitely affect the present and the future. You really
You
can,
know,
Devon.
I'm kind of curious, Gary, because as you know, we all grapple with this kind of anger that's swirling around because of whatever happened, either directly with our parents or it's stuff that has been passed on generationally. How does that play out in your mind and in the wider society, beyond our families?
Oh, in the workplace, you see anger in the people's professions, and to me, remember, anger is in an individual, and that every individual is part of a family, and that member is going to go out into society, whether it's in a workplace, whether it's in a sports recreation. So they're carrying their anger, and often we're just looking for opportunities to explode that anger or express it. And I've seen bosses, you've got people running organizations at different sizes who are full of anger, and they use that anger to abuse their staff, to abuse the system. And it's just like, I'm going to use it in my power, but it's anger.
Hmm.
I, I, I would say, Devon, if you're to sum it up, if we dealt with anger for all the other issues with regards to mental health and economic problems in the world, if we dealt with anger within the home, so many problems that we're facing in society and further afield will be solved. Because you think about, if you're full of anger, you can't be focused about your family, you're not there on your purpose, because the anger is governing you. And I've seen too many people who are in prison because of anger, who've lost relationships because of anger, who've lost access to their children because of anger, and who are homeless because of anger. It is a disease, it's destructive, and it's almost one that's allowed to play out. And it's like, oh, well, men can be angry, that's associated with men. No, because anger is destructive. And you think about it, anger led to the first murder that was recorded in the Bible, a Cain against Abel. Anger sees
Hmm.
no end because it has to be let out.
Yeah.
But anybody without self control is a dangerous person.
You're right. So it creates this vicious cycle because they're angry at home, they go out into the workplace, and especially if they're the boss, or it doesn't matter, but then they express anger, take out their anger at someone who then goes home and take out their anger at on their family,
Yeah,
and then the cycle continues. You just
yeah.
you scar a child, son or daughter, and then they grow up, and it kind of continues. Uh, Fascinating, but a really important subject. I don't think it's one that gets enough oxygen, quite frankly. We really need to pay attention to it. And you're doing some amazing work, so congratulations on that. How does someone connect with you, men especially, if they want to, um, you know, get someone or have someone help them work through their anger issues?
Sure. So the main vehicles are contact me on Facebook, Gary Napier. You also got the Gap Enterprise on Facebook, so you'll see the link there. My email address is gnapier at thegapenterprises.com. And finally, my telephone number, WhatsApp for you guys in the US, and that's 00447917819375.
All right. Thank you for that, Gary, because it's important that we get that out there. You are definitely someone who can speak congruently on this subject because you have had to deal with your own anger issues as well. I just thought of the movie Anger Management. I think you'd be a different, a completely different coach, though. So
Yeah.
that's important.
Yes.
Um, but thank you for spending time with us here, and keep on pushing and keep on doing the great work.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Devon.